Аналар керек па? Сол жақта жоғарыда. Сол отыра бере ма, қыздар? Түсірме.
Bir, екі, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Не, нормально все. Просто они для камеры.
Раз.
Переводчики, проговорите текст, чтобы наушники проверить.
Раз.
Сейчас будем начинать. Пару минут будем начинать. Коллеги-переводчики, текст продиктуйте в английский. Проверка микрофонов. Есть? Экран уже сказали.
Нормально?
Да, ничего страшного, не мешает.
Все готово?
Да, они готовы. Коллеги, наушники проверили, перевод есть? Коллеги-переводчики, на английском в канал текст наговорите, проверка записи идет.
Английский, русский канал, Россия.
Ну, более-менее.
Если өзі кім подскажет ететін, осы жерде біреу постоянно солай айтады. Жоғарыда біле салшы, русский канал неше канал?
Слышно?
Егер барлығы дайын болса, шақыра берейік спикерлерді. Дайынсыздар?
Синхронисты, первый канал мы вас слышим, второй канал проговорить. Да. Орысшасы бірінші канал. Да, он до конца. Естіліп тұр ма?
Неше? Бір ма? Бір естіліп тұрады.
Первый канал. Слышим. Слышим.
Екі ма?
Бір.
Бір?
Он у вас есть? Министр, нашего министра. Отпечатано электронно, русский. Казахстанский. Они переводили. Ну, такой наш.
Қайырлы күн, құрметті бұқаралық ақпарат құралдарының өкілдері. Қазір біз баспасөз конференциясын бастаймыз. Алдарыңызда Қазақстан Республикасы премьер-министрінің орынбасары, сыртқы істер министрі Мұхтар Тойберді мен Америка құрама штаттарының мемлекеттік хатшысы Antony Blinken сөз сөйледі. Спикерлердің сөзінен кейін сіздер бүгінгі кездесудің тақырыбы бойынша сұрақтар қоя аласыздар. Қазақстан Республикасы премьер-министрінің орынбасары, сыртқы істер министрі Мұхтар Тойбердіге сөз беріледі.
Құрметті мемлекеттік хатшы Antony Blinken мырза, құрметті америкалық делегация мүшелері және бұқаралық ақпарат құралдарының өкілдері. Бүгін Астанаға алғашқы ресми сапармен келген ақш мемлекеттік хатшысы Antony Blinkenді Қазақстан сыртқы істер министрлігінде қабылдауға ризамын. Мен онымен осы уақытқа дейін әртүрлі халықаралық іс-шараларда және Вашингтонда кездескенмін, ал бүгін Blinken мырза Астанаға ресми сапармен келді. Қазақстанға қош келдіңіз дегіміз келеді. Бүгінгі күндің бірінші жартысында ақш делегациямен өте нәтижелі кездесулер өткіздік. Мемлекеттік хатшы Қазақстан президенті Қасым-Жомарт Тоқаевтың қабылдауында болды. Достық және сындарлы сипатта өткен келіссөздер барысында екі жақты және көп жақты күн тәртібіндегі өзекті мәселелер, сондай-ақ Қазақстан-Америка ынтымақтастығының перспективалары талқыланды. ақш-пен өзара әрекеттестік кеңейтілген стратегиялық серіктестік рухында дамып келе жатқан қанағатпен атап өткім келеді. Бұны саяси диалогтың сауда-экономикалық және инвестициялық ынтымақтастықтың жандануы растайды. Қазақстан мен ақш арасындағы өзара сауда айналымы 2022 жылы 3 миллиард доллардан асты. Бұл көрсеткіш алдыңғы жылмен салыстырғанда 37%-дан асты. ақш Қазақстан экономикасындағы ең ірі инвесторлардың бірі. 1993 жылдан бері ақш-тың Қазақстанға тікелей шетелдік инвестициялардың жалпы ағыны 62 миллиард доллардан асты. Ал былтыр алғашқы 3 тоқсанында 5 миллиард долларға дейін өсті. Қазақстанда америкалық капиталдың қатысуымен 590-ға жуық кәсіпорын жұмыс істейді. ақш компаниялары Қазақстан нарығына жоғары қызығушылық танытуда. Біз жаңа ғана Орталық Азия елдері мен ақш сыртқы істер министрлерін C5+1 форматында министрлік кездесуін аяқтадық. Орталық Азия елдерінен менің әріптестерім қатысуы күрделі халықаралық жағдайда өңірлік байланысты нығайтуға біздің ортақ саяси күш-жігерімізді айқын көрсетеді. Қазақстан Америка құрама штаттарының Орталық Азия аймағы мен ынтымақтастықты нығайтуға бейілдігін жоғары бағалайды. Біздің мемлекетіміз өзінің дипломатиялық басымдықтарына сәйкес көп векторлы және теңгерімді сыртқы саясатын жалғастырып келеді. Орталық Азия мен ақш біздің негізгі серіктестеріміз болып қала береді. Бұл қабылдаушы тарап ретінде біз үшін C5+1 форматын аймақтық ынтымақтастықтың өзекті тетігіне айналдырады. C5+1 механизмі өзінің Орталық Азиядағы экономикалық ынтымақтастықты, қауіпсіздікті және тұрақты дамуды ілгерілету үшін тиімді аймақтық дипломатиялық платформа ретінде танытты. Іс-шара барысында азық-түлік қауіпсіздігі, терроризммен күрес, энергетика және қоршаған орта саласындағы ынтымақтастықты қоса алғанда кең ауқымды мәселелер талқыланды. Екі жақты қарым-қатынас тақырыбына қайта орала отырып, мемлекеттік хатшының президент Қасым-Жомарт Тоқаев бастамашылық еткен демократияландыру мен заң үстемдігін қамтамасыз етуге бағытталған саяси және экономикалық реформаларды табанды түрде қолдайтынын атап өткім келеді. Біз америкалық тарапқа екі жақты қарым-қатынастарымызды одан әрі нығайтуға деген ниеті үшін алғыс айтамыз. Назарларыңызға рахмет.
Рахмет. Келесі сөз кезегі Америка құрама штаттарының мемлекеттік хатшысы Antony Blinkenге беріледі.
Thank you very much. Mukhtar, thank you. Thank you for today. Thank you for, as you very aptly described it, a very good day, both bilaterally as well as with our C5+1 colleagues. And it's always good to be with you, and it's particularly good to be here in Kazakhstan. When we hosted your delegation in Washington last May, the weather was just a little bit milder than it is today, but I think it's fair to say that the temperature outside is more than made up for by the warmth that you and President Tokayev have shown us on this trip. And I especially want to thank the President for his terrific hospitality, for the generosity of his time, and for the very good conversation that we had. I'm here to underscore that the strong partnership, and in particular the enhanced strategic partnership between the United States and Kazakhstan is moving forward strongly. Ever since being the first nation to recognize Kazakhstan in December of 1991, the United States has been firmly committed to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Kazakhstan and countries across the region. In our discussions today, I reaffirmed the United States' unwavering support for Kazakhstan, like all nations, to freely determine its future, especially as we mark 1 year since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in a failed attempt to deny its people that very freedom. We applaud Kazakhstan for continuing to host more than 200,000 Russian citizens who fled their country after President Putin launched his war. And I want to thank the people of Kazakhstan for generously providing food, clothing, medicine, other humanitarian supplies to Ukraine, including setting up those yurts of invincibility in Kyiv and Busha, where Ukrainians can find warmth and respite from the war. I also reiterated that the United States strongly endorses the reform agenda that President Tokayev announced last March. We look forward to seeing the additional concrete steps Kazakhstan will take to realize that agenda, expanding public participation in the political process, increasing government accountability, curbing corruption, introducing presidential term limits, protecting human rights. Those reforms are an important reason why foreign investors, including from the United States, are increasingly turning to Kazakhstan. American businesses were among the first to invest here, injecting more than $50 billion into the Kazakh economy going back to 1991. We are eager to bolster our economic cooperation, not only to strengthen the development and opportunity within Kazakhstan, but also to strengthen linkages across Central Asia, promoting the diversification of energy and export routes, among other investments that will benefit Kazakhstan's people in very tangible ways. Kazakhstan also continues to be a valued partner on key global issues, reducing the spread of nuclear weapons by dismantling Soviet-era missiles, contributing to vital UN peacekeeping operations from Lebanon to Mali, exploring the galaxy through space cooperation, repatriating and rehabilitating more than 600 foreign terrorist fighters and their families. We're grateful to Kazakhstan for its leadership in Central Asia and for hosting the C5+1 Ministerial today. This is the fourth one that I've had the opportunity to participate in as Secretary, demonstrating our commitment to being a reliable partner to all countries in the region. We discussed with our fellow ministers from Kazakhstan, from Kyrgyzstan, from Tajikistan, from Turkmenistan, from Uzbekistan, concrete ways to continue to advance our shared economic, energy, environmental, and security goals. The C5+1 is an increasingly important platform. Central Asian governments are strongest when they work together to address common challenges and to shape their own future. The United States aspires to be a steadfast partner in those efforts. We're working to our part to try to deliver solutions to the shared challenges that are affecting all of our people, from developing clean energy to contributing to combating diseases like COVID, HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis. Back in September, with food and gas prices surging due to Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, the U.S. committed $16.5 billion toward improving food security here in this region. We also stood up the Economic Resilience Initiative for Central Asia, $25 million to expand regional trade routes, establish new export markets, attract and leverage greater private sector investment, providing people with practical skills for the modern job market. Today, I'm announcing an additional $25 million for that initiative, a total of $50 million to build up the regional economy, and especially to make sure that people have the skills they need to succeed in this global economy. To further empower and connect the people of Central Asia, we're launching an effort to increase English language proficiency for more than 1,000 young professionals in government and across civil society. So, we've had a very productive day of conversation and a number of new initiatives that we hope will build on those discussions to the benefit of our partners in Central Asia. We sat around the table behind you with our colleagues from the C5+1, and I have a notebook filled with very good, concrete ideas about how we can further deepen our collaboration and address in practical ways the challenges that we're facing. I mentioned space exploration a few moments ago, so let me just close by noting that 7 astronauts are currently orbiting above us in the International Space Station. They hail from different countries. They speak different languages. But many of these astronauts journey to the stars together from Kazakhstan, and they will land here in Kazakhstan when they return to Earth. To me, that's a wonderful symbol of how this country can be a launching pad for our collective progress on Earth through the partnership between the United States and Kazakhstan, across Central Asia, around the globe. Thank you.
Рахмет, құрметті әріптестер, енді спикерлерге қойылатын сұрақтарға көшеміз. Қолыңызды көтеріп, содан кейін өзіңізді таныстырыңыз. Сұрағыңызды кімге арнайсыз, сосын сұрағыңызды сол кісіге қоюға болады.
Добрый вечер, Жанна Алпызбаева, телеканал «Атамекен Бизнес». У меня такой вопрос. Запад объявил о необходимости закрыть пути обхода санкций для России. Насколько высоки риски вторичных суверенных санкций для стран Центральной Азии, в частности для Казахстана, и в каком случае их могут ввести, ведь из-за введения санкций против России страдают и наши экономики, в том числе Казахстана, Узбекистана, Кыргызстана. И что предлагает США взамен, чтобы наша экономика не страдала? Какие компенсации? Спасибо.
Кому задают вопрос?
Господину госсекретарю США.
Thank you very much. First, let me start by saying this. The sanctions that dozens of countries around the world are imposing on Russia, as well as the export controls, didn't just materialize out of thin air. countries came together to impose them because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Its aggression against not only Ukraine, but against the very principles at the heart of the international system of the United Nations Charter: territorial integrity, independence, sovereignty, principles that matter deeply to countries in Central Asia, including Kazakhstan. And so, in response to what Russia did, countries around the world, including the United States, have been supporting Ukraine in its efforts to defend itself against the Russian aggression, but also to try to put what pressure we can on Russia, to impose costs on Russia so that it stops the aggression, pulls its troops out, and restores Ukraine's full sovereignty. That's what this is about. So it's important to put it in that context. We are watching compliance with sanctions very closely, and we're having an ongoing discussion with a number of countries, including our C5 partners, on the economic spillover effect, because we're very conscious that this Russian aggression has had real consequences not just for Ukraine and not only for the principles I mentioned, but in very concrete ways for countries around the world, including here in Central Asia. We're issuing licenses that make sense. We're sharing information with our partners, and we're supporting the C5 countries in their efforts to diversify their own trade relationships. So, for example, licenses have been granted for companies or entities in countries that are engaged with sanctioned Russian companies so that they have time to wind down those activities and to cut their ties with Russia. It's not like flipping a light switch. We understand that sometimes you need time to do it in a way that doesn't harm your business. We'll do our part to strengthen the region and improve the lives of people living in Central Asia ourselves in concrete ways. I mentioned a few of them with some of the initiatives that we've engaged in. As I said, I announced $25 billion through the Economic Resilience Initiative for Central Asia, expanding regional trade routes, so that gives new opportunities, new places for countries to engage and to trade, new export markets, so that they're not reliant just on one country, and then attracting private sector investment. And today, as I mentioned, I'm announcing an additional $25 billion to that effort, bringing the total to $50 million. So it's a long way of saying we're very conscious of the spillover consequences of Russia's aggression. We're doing everything we can to minimize them, to mitigate them, and create new opportunities, different opportunities for partners here in Central Asia.
Если позволите, я хотел бы добавить, что между правительством Казахстана и администрацией Соединенных Штатов налажены регулярные консультации по данному вопросу об избежании негативных последствий для экономики Казахстана, а также во избежание возможных различных вторичных санкций. С двух сторон назначены национальные координаторы, они на регулярной связи между собой прямой, и американская сторона, мы благодарны, заранее информирует нас о возможных кейсах, по которым, возможно, будут применены вторичные санкции. Поэтому я хотел бы сказать, что на сегодня у нас ни одной казахстанской компании или сектора, которые бы находились под вторичными санкциями. Спасибо. И нет.
Көп рахмет. Келесі сұрақ кім қояды? Vivian Salam.
Thank you so much. Vivian Salama from the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much, Foreign Minister, for having us. You actually just answered my first question, so I'm going to mix it up a little bit. Are you concerned at all about how deeply entrenched your economy is with Russia, that it would take too long for, say, new allies, new partners like the US and Europe to be able to sort of fill that void moving forward? And Mr. Secretary, you also just answered my first question, but I do have a second one for you regarding the potential Chinese lethal aid assistance to Russia. There have been a number of public statements from you and a number of members of President Biden's cabinet expressing concern about China's deliberations. Can you elaborate a bit on what the U.S. and its allies are doing to persuade Beijing away from such a move, and what consequences it could face if it delivers on any such aid? Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to say that indeed Kazakhstan has very historic ties with both Russia and Ukraine, our economy is interconnected for long time, and that's why definitely all this situation is quite heavily for us, for our economy, and we're trying to avoid any negative effects from the sanctions. Because you can understand that Kazakhstan is a member of Eurasian Economic Union, and we don't have any custom borders between Kazakhstan, Russia, and other members of this union. So that's why definitely it's sometimes very difficult to manage how we can provide this free trade by products and services between our borders, but at the same time we're trying to evade any possibilities, to avoid any possibilities for evasion of sanctions by Russian or even by any foreign companies. Thank you.
Vivian, as you know, this is something that I raised directly with China's senior foreign policy official Wang Yi when I saw him on the margins of the Munich Security Conference last week. And the backdrop here, of course, goes back to even before Russia's aggression against Ukraine. Just a few weeks before that, you'll remember that President Xi and President Putin had a summit meeting in which they talked about a partnership with no limits. And that, of course, in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, was a real concern, including the concern that such a partnership might lead China to materially support Russia in its aggression, including with lethal military support and/or with efforts to systematically evade the sanctions that were being imposed on Russia for the aggression against Ukraine. And as I've mentioned, going back to, I think, the first conversation between President Biden and President Xi after the Russian aggression, President Biden raised this concern and made very clear to President Xi that were Russia to engage in lethal material support for Russia in the aggression against Ukraine or the systematic evasion of sanctions, this would be a serious problem in our relationship. So we've been watching it very carefully from day one. And the reason that I raised this not only with Wang Yi last week, but also publicly, along with other colleagues in the administration, is because of concern we have based on information that we have that China is considering moving beyond the non-lethal support that some of its companies have been providing to actually lethal material support for Russia's war effort in Ukraine. And what I can share with you is that we did very clearly warn China about the implications and consequences of going through with providing such support. We will not hesitate, for example, to target Chinese companies or individuals that violate our sanctions or otherwise engage in supporting the Russian war effort. Beyond that, what I heard very clearly from countries around the world that I've been engaged with over the past 10 days, since these concerns have first been raised and shared with many countries, is that this is not only something that would be a serious problem for China and its relationship with us, but a serious problem in its relationship with countries around the world. And let me just add this. China can't have it both ways when it comes to the Russian aggression in Ukraine. It can't be putting forward peace proposals on the one hand, while actually feeding the flames of the fire that Russia has started with the other hand. So I hope that China will take what we said very seriously, but not only what we said. That's why it's important for so many countries to stand up and say, no, we don't accept this. I can't speak to any specific ideas, plans that Russia may have anywhere else. I think its focus is very much on Ukraine. But I can say that had we failed to stand up in support of the principles that Russia was violating by invading Ukraine, that would have created, I think, a greater prospect that Russian aggression would point in other directions.
Рахмет, бағдарламаның тығыздығына байланысты соңғы сұрақ кім қояды?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I was going to ask a question that's quite similar to my colleagues. Mr. Secretary, if I could ask a little bit more, the idea that you had of, you said repeatedly here the territorial integrity, independence, sovereignty of all the Central Asian nations. Do you see that being at risk at all? I know you just mentioned that you don't see anything specific from Russia, but what are the types of things that the U.S. could provide? Are those security guarantees, if you want to put it that way, diplomatic support? What can the U.S. do to ensure that those values are held? And if I could ask the Foreign Minister a bit of the same thing. You mentioned historic ties both with Russia and Ukraine. To what extent do you feel any threat, any risk from what's happening in Ukraine, not just on the economic front, but also the security front? Thanks very much.
Sean, thank you very much. One of the things that we are working on in very practical ways is to demonstrate that the United States is a steadfast partner for countries in Central Asia. Our support for their independence, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity is real, but it's particularly manifested in two ways. One, it's manifested in helping them in different ways develop the strongest possible capacities for their own security, their growing economic prosperity, and the strength and resilience of their societies. That's the best way to make sure that going forward, these countries can determine their own futures consistent with those principles. And we're doing that on a bilateral basis, and we're doing that, as I mentioned, through the C5+1. One of the things that we've seen in Ukraine is that its own resilience to the Russian aggression, of course, starts with the incredible courage of the Ukrainian people, the extraordinary efforts of its military, but I think it goes beyond that. I think what we're seeing as well is a resilient society that's resilient also because it has stronger and stronger institutions, not only within government, those are usually important, but also beyond it, including a vibrant free press, including a strong civil society. Each of those things is part of Ukraine's success story in dealing with Russia's aggression and in creating a country that's resilient to the aggression, that can deal with it, and that will bounce back from it. And so it's a long way of saying that, you know, our partnerships here, the work we're doing here, is also to help our friends in Central Asia build these kinds of strong, resilient societies with strong institutions, with ever greater capacity for their people, with more and more investment coming in from the United States and from other countries, with greater connections among them, because these governments ultimately are going to be even stronger when they're working together to meet common challenges. And I think that creates the kind of region where their ability to uphold their own territorial integrity, their own sovereignty, their own independence will be that much stronger.
Yes, I just mentioned that definitely Kazakhstan doesn't allow to use its territory for evasion sanctions, but it doesn't mean that for today we have or feel any threats or risks from Russian Federation. As I answered to the first question, Kazakhstan is a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, Collective Security Treaty Organization, Commonwealth of Independent States, with other states and countries surrounding Russia. So our relationship we consider as a alliance in the framework of all these multilateral structures. And for bilateral cooperation relationship, we have solid legal base, and which is more important that we have we completed delimitation process, the state border between Kazakhstan and Russia, and as you know, is the longest land border in the world. It's more than 7,500 kilometers. Now we are in the process of demarcation. It's almost 70% of this border completed. We have regular consultations between the government and head of states on the different issues. And as you know, Kazakhstan will continue its multi-vectoral foreign policy. It means that we are trying to keep the system of the check and balances and to develop the mutually beneficial cooperation relationship with all the countries of the world. Thank you.
Құрметті әріптестер, осымен баспасөз конференциясы аяқталды. Барлықтарыңызға рахмет.